So, as previously stated, the central nervous system is composed of the brain and the spinal cord. So, we have reviewed parts of the brain and some of its major functions. Now, we're going to talk about the spinal cord. So, the spinal cord is a long, thin, tubular bundle of nervous tissue and supports cells that extend from the medulla oblongata. As previously stated, in the brain stem, the medulla oblongata connects to the spinal cord. So if you have the brain stem, it's going to keep going all the way down here to the spinal cord, and essentially the spinal cord would begin. The spinal cord runs through the vertebral canal. It extends from the foramen magnum, which is that hole on the bottom of your skull. So right back here, level of the vertebra, which is about around lumbar 1 or 2. A gross depiction of the spinal cord. Now, there are some anatomical landmarks that we use to identify parts of the spinal cord. So the first part would be the conus medullaris. It is at the inferior end of the spinal cord, pointed end of the nerve roots. The spinal cord continues in a dangling formation called the cauda equina. So the conus medullaris is essentially the end of the spinal cord. So on this part right here, you can see that that's going to run and it's going to end right around here, this little red cone. You can see it over here as well. And then it turns into these hair-like structures called the cauda equina, which looks like a horse's tail, and in Latin term, it just means horse's tail. And it's essentially a collection of spinal nerve roots. So again, when you're looking at the spinal cord, you can just see that this tail-like structure is the cauda equina. Next, we're going to review the filum terminale, long filament of connective tissue. It's about 20 centimeters in length. It's essentially proceeding downward from the conus medullaris all the way down here, and it gives longitudinal support to the spinal cord. So in this picture, it's depicted as the baby blue color. If you look very closely, you can see that is the filum terminale. It comes from the conus medullaris and goes down. This one. The last anatomical landmarks are the cervical and lumbar enlargements. Essentially, they are two places in the spinal cord that give rise to movements of the upper limbs and lower limbs. So the first one is the cervical enlargement, corresponding roughly to the brachial plexus nerves, which gives rise to the upper limbs, and it's around C4 to T1. So it's here. And then the lumbar enlargement, which is around the lumbosacral plexus, which innervate the lower limbs, starts at about T11 and it goes down to L2, which is about the end of the spinal cord. So again, cervical enlargement, lumbar enlargement. So those are the anatomical landmarks of the spinal cord. One more time, we have conus medullaris, filum terminale, cauda equina, and the cervical and lumbar enlargements. You can notice them because they're slightly wider in the spinal cord than the other sections. Next, we have the cross-section of the spinal cord. I'm going to show you a picture very quickly. So the cross-section of the spinal cord is essentially like an accumulation of gray and white matter. So here, you can obviously see here's the gray matter, and all these parts, and here is the white matter. And these are sort of going to stack up and just essentially run down the spinal cord. Long spinal cord is essentially these, just stacked up one on top of the other. So the gray matter looks like a letter H, has two lateral gray masses connected by a gray crossbar. So here's two lateral masses connected, and it goes around the central canal, which is that red hole. Now, as a quick reminder, the gray matter are cell bodies of interneurons and motor neurons and unmyelinated axons. So we reviewed that earlier. So the gray matter is unmyelinated axons. Two of the things that you can notice about this is the posterior median sulcus and the anterior median fissure. So these are two grooves that are distinguishable on the cross section of the spinal cord. Now you have two dorsal projections of gray matter, and those are called the dorsal, which are the posterior horns, and then the ventral, which are the anterior horns. So here you have the anterior horns and the posterior horns. You also, on some parts of the spinal cord, will have lateral horns. I drew them in here. The lateral horns are only present in the thoracic section of the spinal cord and some of the superior section of the lumbar. So this doesn't have it, but it is drawn in for you so you could see where it would be. So the spinal cord, again, is mainly gray matter, so it is multipolar. Okay, now we're going to review the different horns and what they innervate or what they do. So we have the ventral horns, which are these orange guys right here. They're mainly cell bodies of somatic motor neurons. These motor neurons send out their axons to skeletal muscles via rootlets that then become roots of the spinal cord. So here, again, and then the amount of gray matter apparent in the spinal cord is present at a given level reflects the amount of skeletal muscle innervated at that level. So the ventral horns are largest at the lumbral and cervical enlargements that we just spoke about. So those parts in the spinal cord where they're thicker, there's going to be more gray matter, which is why it becomes larger. The dorsal horns have interneurons and they're somatic sensory. So their sensory info is coming from the body, including fine touch, proprioception, and vibration. Lateral horns are autonomic sympathetic division. Motor neurons serve all the visceral organs. So that's it for the central nervous system. Thanks for listening.